Hello, my name is Marcus Hale. I'm 41 years old. I own a small logistics company, and until 6 months ago, I thought I understood exactly who my wife was. I was wrong. People always imagine betrayal as something loud, a screaming match, a lipstick stain, a hotel receipt left in the wrong pocket. But the worst betrayals don't happen like that. They happen quietly. They happen in kitchens, in shared bank accounts, in polite smiles across dinner tables. They happen while you're still paying the mortgage. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already standing in the middle of the fire. My wife, Vanessa, didn't leave me in tears. She left me with confidence. That was the part that stayed with me. Not guilt, not sadness. Confidence. Like she had already calculated every outcome. Like she had already won. And the truth is, for a while, I thought she had. We were married for 11 years. No kids. One house, 2 cars. One business that started in my garage and slowly became something real. The kind of life that looks solid from the outside. Clean, respectable, predictable. People said we were lucky, that we had built something stable, and maybe we had. But stability is a dangerous illusion when only one person is still protecting it. Vanessa changed slowly. That's how it always happens. No one wakes up one morning and says, "My marriage is over." It happens in pieces, small ones. She started staying out later. Not every night, just often enough to feel wrong. Then came the distance, the kind that can't be measured by feet. She was still in the same room, still at the same table, still sleeping on the same side of the bed. But she wasn't there anymore, and once that happens, you can feel it, even if you don't want to, especially if you don't want to. At first, I blamed stress, then work, then myself. That's another thing men like me do when something is breaking. We look for the part we can fix. We tighten bolts on things that are already collapsing. We tell ourselves, maybe if I work less, maybe if I listen more, maybe if I stop being tired all the time. So I tried. I planned dinners, weekend trips, bought flowers like some version of myself from 10 years earlier might still be enough. She smiled, said thank you, played along. But there was always something behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Detachment. Not anger, not resentment. Something colder. Like she had already moved on emotionally and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The night she finally said it, I remember exactly what she was wearing. A white silk blouse, black pants, gold earrings I bought her for our anniversary 3 years earlier. She stood in the kitchen with a glass of wine in her hand and said it the same way someone might say they're thinking of repainting the guest room. I don't think this is working anymore. No tears, no trembling voice, no hesitation. Just a sentence, delivered like a business update. I looked at her for a long time before I asked the obvious question. Is there someone else? She didn't answer immediately. And when someone pauses before answering that question, you already know. She took a sip of wine, set the glass down, then looked me directly in the eye and said, "That's not the point. Not the point." I almost laughed, because when people say something isn't the point, it's usually the entire point. But I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. That seemed to surprise her. I think she expected emotion, a scene, a reaction she could later describe to her friends as proof that she had no choice. But I didn't give her that, because something inside me had already gone quiet. Not broken, quiet. And quiet men are dangerous when they finally start paying attention. She told me she wanted space, said we should handle this like adults, said she didn't want it to get ugly. That was the phrase she used. Ugly. Which is interesting because people usually say that when they're already planning to do something ugly themselves. The next morning, she left for what she called a few days, a suitcase, her laptop, her jewelry case, and a smile so calm it made my stomach turn. At 10:14 that same morning, my bank sent me a fraud alert. At first, I almost ignored it. I was tired, distracted, numb, but something made me open it, and that one notification changed everything. Because Vanessa hadn't just decided to leave. She had already started taking things with her. Money, access, control. And suddenly, I understood what that confidence had really meant. She wasn't walking away. She thought she was walking away with everything. And that was the moment I stopped being a husband and started becoming a problem. I didn't panic. That's the strange part. Looking back, I probably should have. A normal person sees a fraud alert tied to a shared account the morning after his wife walks out with a suitcase and starts spiraling. But I didn't. Not outwardly. Inside, yes, inside everything had already started rearranging itself. But on the surface, I got very still, very clear. Because panic is useful for exactly one thing: making mistakes. And I had the sudden feeling that Vanessa was counting on me to make one. The alert was simple. A large transfer attempt from one of our joint accounts to a business account I didn't recognize. Not a purchase, not a bill, not a subscription. A transfer. Big enough to matter. Big enough to make your pulse change. I clicked the details. And there it was. The account name was unfamiliar, but the timing wasn't. The request had been made less than an hour after she left the house. Less than an hour. That told me two things immediately. First, this wasn't impulsive. Second, this had been planned. You don't walk out of an 11-year marriage, smile on the way out, and start moving money before lunch unless you've been mentally gone for a long time. I called the bank. Not angry, not dramatic, just direct. I told them I wanted the transfer frozen pending review. The woman on the phone asked if I suspected unauthorized activity. I almost said no, because technically, Vanessa's name was on the account. Technically, she had access. Technically, she hadn't hacked anything. But there's a difference between legal access and strategic theft. And somehow, even before I had proof, I knew that was what this was. So I said, yes, I want it flagged. She asked a few questions. I answered all of them, calmly, methodically. Then I hung up and opened every account we had: checking, savings, emergency fund, brokerage, business reserve, credit cards, home equity line, everything. And what I found in the next 40 minutes changed the story completely. At first, it was small things. Too small. A few unusual purchases over the last few months. Hotel charges in parts of town she had no reason to be in. Dinner tabs that didn't match the nights she said she was with coworkers. A boutique furniture store. A deposit to a realtor. That one made me sit back in my chair. A realtor. Not thinking about leaving, not confused, not needing space. She had already been building an exit. And apparently she planned to fund it with my life. That was the moment the last illusion died. Because affairs are one kind of betrayal. Cruel, humiliating, personal. But this was colder. This was architecture. This was strategy. This was someone quietly measuring the walls of a new life while still sleeping in my bed. I kept digging, and the deeper I went, the more I found. A storage unit payment I'd never seen before. A second phone line, a luxury apartment application fee, and then a name. Not hers. A man's. Ethan Vale. It appeared in connection with a recurring transfer from her personal credit card. Not huge amounts, just enough to avoid attention. Which, ironically, is exactly what drew mine. I wrote it down. Then I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was shocked anymore. That part was already over. No, I stared because it made everything make sense. The distance, the calm, the confidence. She wasn't leaving into uncertainty. She thought she had a landing pad. A man, a plan, and my money. That combination can make people feel invincible. For about 5 minutes. I should tell you something important here. My business looks simple from the outside. Freight contracts, warehousing, regional routes. Nothing glamorous. But if you survive long enough in logistics, you learn one thing very quickly. The person who controls the timing controls the outcome. Not the loudest person, not the angriest, not the one who looks the most confident walking away, the one who understands sequence. And Vanessa, for all her planning, had made one mistake. She moved too early. That fraud alert had bought me something she didn't know I had. Time. A little, but enough. And time, in the hands of someone who has finally stopped hoping things will fix themselves, can become a weapon. I spent the rest of that afternoon making no emotional decisions. That was the rule. No calls to her. No confrontation. No dramatic messages. No, how could you? Because once people know you know, they start adjusting the story, deleting things, calling lawyers, moving faster. No. If she wanted to believe she was still ahead, I was going to let her. At 4:32 p.m., she texted me. Just one sentence. Hope you're okay. We'll figure this out like adults. I stared at it. Then I smiled for the first time all day. Because that's what people say when they've already done something unforgivable and are hoping to manage your reaction before you understand the full shape of it. So I wrote back exactly 7 words. Take the time you need. No rush. Then I put my phone down. And that was the moment she really lost. She just didn't know it yet. The first thing I did was not call a lawyer. That surprises people when I tell them now. Because when your wife walks out, starts moving money, and leaves a trail that points straight to another man, everyone assumes the next step is legal. Papers. Threats. Protection. And yes, all of that was coming. But first, I needed information. Not assumptions. Not emotion. Information. Because once you let other people into a situation like this, the story starts hardening around whatever facts you hand them first. And I wasn't about to build my response on half-truths and wounded instinct. So I made a list, not in my phone, on paper. That matters. Phones get searched. Screens get seen. People glance at things when they think you're not paying attention. Paper doesn't ping. Paper doesn't betray you. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 things. How much has she moved? Who is Ethan? What does she think she owns? Then I got to work. I started with the accounts again, this time slower. Methodical. Not just looking for big transfers. Patterns. Tiny things tell the truth better than dramatic ones. $197 to a storage unit. $312 to a boutique furniture delivery company. $900 to a realtor retainer. 5 separate dinners in neighborhoods Vanessa never had business in. Then I saw something that made me sit up straight. A monthly charge for a digital mailbox service. Private. Off-site. Used mostly by people who don't want mail showing up at home. That was not a coincidence. That was infrastructure. So I drove there. Not because I expected to get access, I'm not stupid. I drove there because addresses tell stories, neighborhoods tell stories, parking lots tell stories. And sometimes just seeing where a lie lives can tell you more than a credit statement ever will. The mailbox center was attached to a high-end apartment complex on the north side of the city. New glass, secure lobby, concierge desk. The kind of place people move into when they want their old life to look beneath them. I sat in my truck across the street and watched for 20 minutes. Then I saw him. I knew it was Ethan before I ever saw his face. Because some people carry themselves like they've never had to survive consequences. Tall, pressed shirt, expensive watch. The kind of man who smiles at receptionists without ever really seeing them. He came out of the building with a woman behind him. Not Vanessa. Someone else. Brunette. Laughing. Hand on his arm. And for a second, I actually felt relief. Not because it hurt less. Because it clarified everything. Vanessa hadn't left me for the love of her life. She'd attached herself to a man who collected women the way some people collect restaurant reservations. Casually, confidently, without remembering names for very long. And if she was betting her future on him, then she was already standing on a trapdoor. I stayed parked there for another 10 minutes. Then I went home. No scene, no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, just clarity. And clarity is expensive. But once you have it, you stop wasting energy on fantasies. That evening I opened our home office safe. Inside were copies of everything important. Business formation docs, property records, insurance binders, old tax returns. A sealed envelope my accountant had insisted I keep for bad years. I used to think he meant recession. Turns out he meant marriage. That envelope contained the only thing Vanessa had never fully understood. The house was in both our names. The joint account had both our names. The visible life had always looked shared. But the engine underneath it, that was different. My company had been built before we married. The primary operating reserve was protected through a holding structure my accountant had set up years ago after a supplier lawsuit nearly wiped me out. Vanessa knew enough to feel entitled, not enough to understand where the walls actually were. And that, more than anything else, was where she'd made her second mistake. She had studied the surface, not the system. I called my accountant at 7:10 that night, not to explain, just to ask one question. If someone thought they could empty me through the obvious doors, I said, how fast can we close the hidden ones? He didn't laugh, didn't ask why. He just said, how much time do you have? I looked at my phone, at Vanessa's last message, at the fraud alert, still sitting in my inbox like a flare over a battlefield. Then I answered with the only honest thing I had. Not much. There was a pause. Then he said, then don't waste tonight. So I didn't. I made calls, 3 of them. Accountant, private banker, and finally, the lawyer. By midnight, I had a yellow legal pad full of notes, a half-empty bottle of bourbon I never touched, and one cold realization sitting in my chest, like steel. Vanessa didn't just think she was leaving, she thought she was graduating to a better man, a better life, a cleaner future, and she thought I'd be too broken to stop her. That was almost insulting. Because heartbreak can make you weak for a little while. But humiliation? Humiliation can make you incredibly efficient. And for the first time since she walked out, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was anxious, because I was focused. There's a difference. Anxious people check their phones in bed and hope for answers. Focused people get dressed before the sun is up and start closing doors. I made coffee. Black, no breakfast, no music. Just silence and a legal pad. By 7:30 a.m., I was in my accountant's office. He was already waiting for me with files spread across the conference table like a surgeon laying out instruments before a complicated procedure. That was the tone of the day. Precise, unemotional, necessary. He slid one folder toward me and said, "She can make a mess, but she can't take the structure if we move now." That sentence did something to my breathing. Not relief exactly, more like alignment, because for the first time since Vanessa walked out, I could see the shape of the battlefield. And once you can see the field, you stop being prey. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. What she had access to, what she thought she had access to, and what she would discover very soon she never actually controlled. That's the thing about people who live close to wealth without building it themselves. They start confusing proximity with ownership. Vanessa had spent 11 years beside my work, beside my stress, beside the sleepless nights, the supplier calls, the payroll scares, the years where I didn't buy myself a winter coat because I needed to keep trucks running. She had watched all of it. But watching a machine work and understanding how it's built are not the same thing. She knew where the dashboard lights were. She had no idea where the engine was. By noon, we had done 3 critical things. First, we moved the operating reserve into a protected internal structure that required dual authorization and legal documentation for any future attempt to access it. Second, we flagged every joint financial instrument for review. Not frozen completely. That would have tipped her off too early. No, we did something smarter. We slowed them. That's often better than blocking, because when people don't hit a wall right away, they keep walking toward the trap. Third, we documented everything. Every suspicious transfer, every unexplained payment, every date tied to what now looked less like leaving a marriage and more like financial staging. By 1:15, I was in my attorney's office. She was sharp, calm, and completely uninterested in anyone's emotional performance. Exactly what I needed. I handed her the timeline, the transactions, the name Ethan Vale. She read in silence for several minutes. Then she looked up and asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want justice, or do you want control?" That's a dangerous question when asked by the right person. Because most people say justice. It sounds noble, clean, reasonable. But justice is slow and public. Control is quiet, strategic, and if you've ever been blindsided by someone who spent months pretending everything was normal while building an exit behind your back, you stop craving noble very quickly. So I answered honestly, "Control?" She nodded once, like she had expected that. Then she said, "Good. Then stop trying to win emotionally. We're going to win structurally." I have never liked a sentence more in my life. We spent the next 2 hours preparing what she called a containment plan, temporary account restrictions, property documentation, evidence preservation, formal notice timing, not a divorce filing yet, not yet, because timing was still the weapon, and Vanessa still believed she was ahead. That belief was valuable. I wasn't going to waste it. At 4:07 p.m., while I was leaving the office, she called. First time since she left. I watched my phone ring in my hand until it stopped. Then, almost immediately, a text came through. "Can you call me?" Something weird happened with the account. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Something weird. That's how people describe the first crack in a plan they thought was bulletproof. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We need to talk." Not, "I made a mistake." Something weird. I didn't call. I waited exactly 41 minutes. Then I sent one sentence back. "In meetings." What happened? Simple. Neutral. Like a husband trying to be civil. Like a man still standing in the version of the story she thought existed. Her reply came fast. A transfer didn't go through. I think the bank flagged something by mistake. By mistake. That one almost made me smile. Because the most dangerous moment for a person like Vanessa is not when she knows she's losing. It's when she still thinks the universe has simply inconvenienced her. That's when arrogance keeps them exposed. So I wrote back, probably just fraud protection. I'll look into it tomorrow. Tomorrow. That word mattered. Because tomorrow gave her one more night to feel safe. One more night to keep building confidence around a future that was already collapsing underneath her. That evening, I sat alone in the house we had shared for 11 years and realized something I hadn't let myself feel yet. I wasn't sad. Not anymore. I was insulted. Not by the affair, not even by the money, by the assumption. The assumption that I was too ordinary to notice, too emotional to respond well, too broken to think clearly. Vanessa hadn't just underestimated my pain. She had underestimated my intelligence. And that, more than anything else, was going to cost her. Because while she was texting me from whatever apartment, hotel, or borrowed fantasy she'd stepped into, the system was already moving quietly, legally, irreversibly. And by the time the bank called again, she was going to understand exactly who she had tried to play. The call came the next morning. Not to me, to her. I know that because she called me 10 seconds later. Not text. Not a calm message. A call. The kind people make when something stops working the way it was supposed to. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," I said, like nothing in my world had shifted. There was no greeting on her end. No, "How are you?" Just breath. Fast. Tight. "What did you do?" she asked. Not, "What's going on?" Not, "Did something happen?" What did you do? That told me everything. Because when people go straight to accusation, it means something they believed was guaranteed has suddenly disappeared. "I'm in the middle of something," I said. "What happened?" There was a pause. Then she exhaled, trying to steady herself. The bank called. They froze the transfer. They said there's a review. That there are restrictions on the account. I leaned back in my chair, looked out the window, took a sip of coffee, and let a full 2 seconds pass before answering. "That sounds like standard fraud protection," I said. Silence, then sharper. "No, it's not standard. I've never had this happen before." "Of course you haven't, because you've never tried to move money like this before." But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "I can call them later and see what's going on." Later, again, time, always time. She didn't like that. I could hear it in the way she shifted her tone. More controlled now, more careful. "Marcus, I need access to that money," she said. "I already made commitments." Commitments. Interesting word. Not plans, not "I might need it." Commitments. Which meant she had already promised something to someone else. Probably him. Ethan. And promises made with money that isn't fully yours have a way of collapsing quickly. "I'll look into it," I repeated. "I've got meetings all morning." That wasn't a lie. They just weren't the kind of meetings she thought. She hung up without saying goodbye. That told me more than anything else she could have said. Because polite exits are for people who still believe they're in control. After that, things started moving faster. At 10:22 a.m., my lawyer sent me a confirmation email. Preliminary protections in place. At 11:05, my accountant forwarded me an update from the bank. The flagged transaction had triggered a broader review of recent activity. Exactly what we wanted. At 11:47, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It only said one thing. "Marcus, this is Ethan." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I laughed. Not loud. Just a short, quiet exhale. Because that meant one of two things. Either Vanessa had told him to reach out, or he had just realized he was standing in the middle of something he didn't understand. Either way, he was already closer to the problem than he wanted to be. I didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, I did something simple. I searched his name, public records, business filings, social media. The internet tells you more about a person than they ever intend, if you know what you're looking for. And within 15 minutes, I had a clear picture. Ethan Vale wasn't poor, he wasn't desperate, but he also wasn't stable. 2 dissolved companies, 1 pending lawsuit from a former partner, a pattern of short-term ventures that looked impressive at first glance and collapsed quietly a year later. The kind of man who looks successful in restaurants and disappears in courtrooms. And Vanessa had chosen to build her exit plan around him. That was almost poetic. At 12:18, he called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. "Hey, Marcus. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding with the accounts. Vanessa said you might be able to clear it up." Misunderstanding. Of course. That's the word people use when they realize they've stepped into something that has consequences. I still didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. No comment, no explanation. Just information. Because at this point, I wasn't having conversations. I was building a record. At 2:03 p.m., Vanessa called again. This time, I didn't answer at all. Not because I was avoiding her, because I was repositioning. There's a moment in situations like this where the person who thought they had control starts to feel it slipping. And when that happens, they accelerate. They push harder. They make mistakes. And that's exactly what I needed. By late afternoon, the tone of her messages had changed from controlled to urgent. "Marcus, I need you to respond. This is getting serious. We need to handle this now. Now." That word again. She was out of time. She just didn't know how much. I sat in my office, looking at the screen, and realized something very simple. The plan she had spent months building was starting to collapse in less than 24 hours. Not because I attacked it, because I let it keep moving until it exposed itself. And that's the difference between reacting and controlling. At 6:11 p.m., my lawyer called. "We're ready," she said. 2 words. Simple, heavy, final. I looked around my office, at the company I built, at the life Vanessa thought she could extract herself from cleanly, at the quiet systems already shifting beneath the surface. Then, I asked the only question that mattered. "What happens when the bank calls again?" There was a pause. Then she said, "This time, it won't be a warning." And for the first time since this started, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because I finally understood the position I was in. She thought she was leaving with everything. Ethan thought this was just a temporary complication. The bank thought it was reviewing unusual activity. But underneath all of that, the structure had already changed. And when that call came, it wasn't going to fix anything. It was going to end it. The second call came at 9:08 a.m. This time, it wasn't to her. It was to me. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Hale," the voice said, calm, professional. "We've completed the review on the flagged accounts." I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead." There were multiple irregular transfer attempts tied to shared access. Based on the documentation you provided, we've placed permanent restrictions on those movements. Any further attempts will require legal authorization. Permanent. That was the word. Not delayed, not reviewed. Permanent. "And the attempted transfer?" I asked. "Blocked," he said. "Completely." I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of relief, out of recognition. Because that was it. That was the moment the plan died. Not mine. Hers. "Thank you," I said, and ended the call. 10 seconds later, my phone lit up. Vanessa. I let it ring, then stop, then ring again. On the third call, I answered. She didn't say hello. Her voice was different now. Not controlled, not confident. Sharp, fractured. "They locked everything," she said. "The bank said I can't move anything without additional authorization. What did you do?" Same question, different tone. Because now, she wasn't accusing. She was realizing. "I secured our accounts," I said. "That's all." "That's all?" she snapped. "Marcus, I have obligations. I have payments scheduled. This is going to cause serious problems." I almost asked her which problems, the apartment, the furniture, or Ethan. But I didn't, because the answers didn't matter anymore. "You should have thought about that before making commitments," I said. Silence, then softer, more careful. "Marcus, we need to talk." "We? Interesting." "We're talking," I said. "No," she said quickly. "In person. This is getting out of hand." Out of hand. That's what people say when consequences finally catch up with decisions they thought were safe. "I don't think that's necessary," I said. That's when her voice cracked. Not fully, just enough. "You're overreacting," she said. "It was just money. We can sort this out." Just money. That one almost made me laugh, because people always minimize the part they were willing to risk the most. "It wasn't just money," I said. "It was planning." She didn't respond, because she knew I was right. I could hear her breathing on the other end, trying to find a version of this conversation where she still had leverage. She didn't. "Who told you?" she asked finally. No denial, no confusion, just a direct line to the truth. "I pay attention," I said. That was enough. She hung up. No goodbye, no last word, just silence. The kind that follows when someone realizes the script they wrote no longer applies. An hour later, Ethan called. I answered this time, not because I needed to, because I wanted to hear it. "Marcus," he said, his voice tight. "I think we need to clear something up. Vanessa told me there were funds available, and now I'm being told that's not the case." Being told? By the bank? By reality? "I'm not sure what you were told," I said, calm. "But nothing you were promised was ever yours." Silence. Then a shift. Not anger, distance, the kind of emotional step back people take when they realize they're standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I didn't know the situation was complicated," he said. Complicated. Another good word. I'm sure you didn't, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, I think it's best if I step out of this. Of course you do, because men like Ethan don't stay for consequences. They stay for convenience. And the moment convenience disappears, so do they. That sounds like a good idea, I said. And that was the end of Ethan. No fight, no loyalty, no dramatic defense of the woman he had supposedly been building a future with. Just exit, clean, fast, predictable. By the afternoon, Vanessa called again. This time she didn't start with anger or demands. She started with something else. Can we fix this? She asked. Fix. That word felt almost surreal, like we were suddenly talking about a broken appliance instead of months of calculated betrayal. No, I said. Simple, final. Silence. Then, very quietly, You're really going to do this? That question carried everything. Not confusion, not disbelief, understanding. Because now she saw it, the structure, the distance, the fact that she was no longer negotiating with the version of me she had lived with for 11 years. Yes, I said. Another long pause. Then she asked the last question. What am I supposed to do now? And for a moment, I considered answering. Not out of sympathy, out of curiosity. But then I realized something. For months, she had been building a life without me, making plans, making commitments, making decisions, without asking, without including, without considering what it would cost. So I gave her the only honest answer I had left. The same thing you expected me to do, I said. Figure it out. And I hung up. That was it. No final speech, no dramatic ending, just a line drawn cleanly through everything that had come before. Over the next few days, things unraveled exactly the way they always do when a plan is built on assumptions instead of reality. The apartment deal fell through, the payments she had scheduled started bouncing, and Ethan was gone. Completely. No messages, no support, no future, just absence. And that's when it hit her. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, like cold water rising. She hadn't just lost me. She hadn't just lost access to money. She had lost the illusion that she was in control, and that is a much harder thing to replace. As for me, I went back to work, to my company, to my life, to the things that had always been real, because in the end, this was never about revenge. Not really. It was about correction. She thought she could walk away with everything, the money, the stability, the future. And all I did was remove the parts that were never hers to begin with. I'm Marcus Hale. I'm 41 years old. And I learned something most people don't understand until it's too late. If someone builds their plan on the belief that you won't see clearly, that you won't act calmly, that you won't respond strategically, then the most powerful thing you can do is exactly that. Because the moment they realize you're not the person they thought they could outplay, they don't just lose the plan. They lose everything.